I never liked office parties. The small talk, the fake laughs, the people pretending to be closer than they really are. But Kristen loved them, said it was good for networking, or that she liked seeing coworkers outside of the 9-to-5 grind. I never quite bought that, but I went along anyway. That's marriage, right? Showing up even when you don't want to. This particular one was for a guy named Matt or Mike. I honestly can't remember. Someone she barely knew from another department. He'd just bought a new house in the suburbs, one of those modern cookie-cutter places with big windows and string lights. I didn't recognize most of the faces there, but I assumed they were her people, co-workers, spouses, plus ones. I tried to look comfortable, but truthfully, I felt like a coat left on the wrong chair. Out of place and unnecessary. Kristen looked amazing that night. I remember that part clearly. She wore this deep green dress that hugged her just enough to turn heads but not enough to look like she was trying. Her hair was pinned up loosely, a few strands falling around her face, and her makeup, especially the red lipstick, was bolder than usual. She never wore that shade, said it was too loud for her. When I asked what the occasion was, she just smiled and said, "Just wanted to feel good tonight." I didn't think much of it then. I told her she looked beautiful, and she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, distracted, already scanning the crowd. We hadn't even been there 15 minutes when I saw him. Ryan. The name had come up before. New guy. Marketing. Just transferred from another branch. Supposedly bright, ambitious, and great with ideas. Kristen had mentioned him during dinner once, saying he brought a fresh energy to the office. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But the moment I saw him approach her, something inside me shifted. He was younger than me, early 30s maybe, clean-shaven, fitted button-down, confident posture. One of those guys who always seems like he's telling a joke, even when he's not. The way his eyes locked on Kristen felt rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for her. They hugged. Nothing dramatic, but not nothing either. His hand lingered a beat too long on the small of her back. She laughed when he said something in her ear, her whole face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. And then, she reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. I froze. It wasn't the kind of touch you give someone you barely know. It was familiar, comfortable, the kind that says, "I like being close to you." It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was long enough for me to notice. Long enough for her to notice me noticing. Our eyes met across the patio. Her hand dropped from his shoulder like she'd touched something hot. And then, in a move so abrupt it almost seemed theatrical, she raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she called out, loud enough to hush the conversations around her. People turned toward her, raising their drinks. "To my husband," she said, glancing at me with that same bright smile she wore when trying to hide something. "The man who once created a color-coded spreadsheet to plan our vacation. May we all aspire to that level of extreme fun management." Laughter erupted around her. Even Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? But inside, I felt something twist. She had made those kinds of jokes before, usually at home, playful teasing. But saying it like that, in front of strangers with that little mocking edge in her voice, it felt like a jab dressed in humor. Something performative. Something designed to draw attention away from what I'd just seen. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I moved from conversation to conversation like a ghost. People smiled at me, made small talk, but I couldn't focus. Every time I looked across the yard, Kristen and Ryan were somewhere nearby, talking, laughing, too at ease. She didn't touch him again, at least not that I saw. But it didn't matter. The image was burned into my brain. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid, that they were just colleagues and I was being possessive. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the difference between a work friend and whatever that was. I knew how Kristen looked when she was genuinely happy, and how she looked when she was performing happiness. We drove home in silence. The music on the radio filled the space between us, but it didn't cover the tension. She looked out the window, humming along to a song she didn't even like. I waited until we were almost home to bring it up. "You and Ryan seem close?" I said casually, trying not to sound accusatory. She glanced at me like I just asked if the sky was blue. What? No, he's just new. I was being friendly. I saw you touch his shoulder. She blinked. Seriously? You're reading into everything tonight. I was laughing at something stupid he said. It was nothing. You pulled away when you saw me. She let out a small laugh, almost condescending. Oh my God. You're being dramatic. I made a joke and now you're mad about it? I'm not mad about the joke. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. You're imagining things. That laugh, the toast, it was just a joke. Don't make this into something it's not. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was imagining things. But that didn't explain the look she gave him. Or the way she looked away from me. Or the fact that my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't shake. Later, as we got ready for bed, she was all smiles again, brushing her hair, making small talk, acting like everything was fine. But there was a distance there, just under the surface. Like she was putting on a show for me. Like she wanted me to see her as calm, light-hearted, untouched by the thing that was now gnawing at my stomach. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her back was turned to me. I could hear her soft breathing, steady and relaxed, like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, going back over every detail, how she'd gotten ready that night, how she'd said Ryan's name the first time, how she never once checked in with me at the party. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Not because of what had happened, but because of what I was beginning to realize. I didn't trust her the way I used to. Something had changed. One moment, one touch, and my brain was running in loops I couldn't stop. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just some random insecurity. Something had shifted. Something small but undeniable. I couldn't name it yet, but it was there, lodged somewhere beneath my ribs like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the moment the foundation began to crack. Not when she touched him. Not even when she mocked me in front of everyone. It was afterward, when she acted like none of it mattered. When she made me question what I'd seen. When she turned it around and made me feel like the problem. That's when the real damage started. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it didn't stop growing. After that night at the party, I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself it was just a weird moment. Maybe I was reading into things too much. Kristen had always been friendly, always someone people gravitated toward. She was warm, social, and natural at making people feel seen. I used to love that about her. But after the way Ryan leaned into her ear, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder, the way she mocked me to an audience just seconds after catching my eye, it started to bother me in ways I couldn't shake off. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more things started falling into place in my mind. Not neatly. More like puzzle pieces that had been on the table all along. Ones I never noticed until I started looking for a pattern. And once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. It began with her phone. We used to leave our phones on the kitchen counter when we came home. She never cared who saw a text or missed a call. But that changed. Suddenly, her phone was always with her. In the bathroom, in the bedroom, on the coffee table, but screen down. If it buzzed and I happened to glance at it, she'd tilt it away. Say something like, "Work again." Or "It's just group chat stuff." One night, I noticed her texting rapidly while we were watching a movie. When I asked what was so funny, she smiled and said, "It's just Lisa. You wouldn't get it." Then she locked her phone and put it in her hoodie pocket. Lisa's name used to make her laugh out loud. Now it made her look over her shoulder. The calls came next. Late ones. Quiet ones. She started taking her calls outside. It was fall, and the nights were cold, but she'd wrap herself in a blanket, step out onto the porch, and talk in a low voice I couldn't quite make out. I'd hear the occasional laugh or the sound of her pacing. When I asked who it was always someone from the office. "People are just panicking about deadlines," she'd say. "They can't handle things without me." Her tone made it sound like a burden, but I noticed she never seemed annoyed about the calls. If anything, she looked lighter afterward, like she'd enjoyed them. Then came the perfume. I remember we'd sampled that particular scent a year earlier at the mall. She'd wrinkled her nose and called it overwhelming. But now it followed her when she came through the door. Heavy, expensive, unfamiliar. I asked if she'd switched brands. She smiled casually and said, "It was a gift sample from a client. Figured I'd try something new." I nodded, but the explanation felt too smooth, too ready. And suddenly she was wearing it often. Sometimes when she claimed she was just staying late at the office, or when she said she was grabbing drinks with the team. Then there were the wine glasses. One evening I came home from work to find 2 rinsed glasses drying on the rack. Nothing else out of place. Just those 2. She said she'd been sampling a new bottle and accidentally used both. But she'd always been a single glass person. She hated doing dishes. And I remembered a few nights before that, finding the same thing. 2 glasses on the table, a half-empty bottle, no mention of company. I asked if she had friends over. She said no. Just me and some Netflix. But she didn't mention what show. Didn't ask me to join. Her clothes changed too. Slowly. Subtly. Nothing drastic, no plunging necklines or short skirts. But different. Newer. Fitted. One afternoon, I noticed tags in the trash from a store she'd once called too flashy. She'd never liked drawing attention. But now she wore outfits that were more curated. Like she was dressing for someone who noticed the details. She brushed it off when I brought it up. "Work events," she said. "Gotta look the part." But something about her tone didn't match the effort she was putting in. Her routine shifted. Her rhythm changed. She used to be home by 6:30 like clockwork. Dinner, shows, her night skincare routine. Predictable things that made up the quiet comfort of being with someone for years. But now, meetings ran long, or I stopped at the gym, or I needed some alone time. Some nights she didn't get back until after 9. Once it was nearly 11. I waited up, told myself not to be the guy who interrogates his wife. But when I asked how her night was, she offered the kind of vague answer you give a stranger in an elevator. It was fine, tiring. There was a hollowness to her words, a distance in her smile. She was too cheerful, almost rehearsed. Other times she was cold, distracted, barely listening. I'd talk about my day, and she'd nod, but her eyes would drift to her phone. I asked once if something was bothering her. She looked surprised, then said, "No, I'm just tired." But I could feel her slipping, like she was living 2 lives and I only had access to one. One night I walked into the room and caught her quickly swiping her phone screen away. She laughed and held it up. "Just checking memes," she said. But the way she was gripping the phone, the slight tremble in her fingers, made something tighten in my chest. I started second-guessing everything. I'd reread her texts to me, trying to find some hint of a shift. Something colder, shorter. I found myself analyzing the smiley faces she used. When had she stopped saying "love you" at the end of her messages? Was it last week? Or had it been longer? There was a night I came home early from work. She didn't expect me for another hour. As I opened the door, I thought I heard something. Whispers or footsteps. But when I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The living room was pristine. The couch cushions freshly fluffed. The scent of that same perfume still hung faintly in the air. She came out of the bedroom a few minutes later, startled to see me. She smiled quickly. "You're home early." I nodded. "Yeah, just felt like being home." She looked caught. Not guilty necessarily, but surprised. Like she'd been somewhere else in her mind, and I'd walked in unannounced. She asked if I wanted to order Thai food, said she'd been craving it. But her voice sounded too light, too eager to redirect. And maybe that was the worst part of it, how normal everything looked on the surface. Nothing outright damning. No texts I could point to. No hotel receipts or lipstick stains. Just this slow, creeping unease. The sense that someone had moved things in the house slightly when I wasn't looking. That the rhythm we built over the years had shifted, even though the melody was the same. I didn't tell anyone what I was feeling. I was too embarrassed. What was I supposed to say? I think my wife might be lying to me because she changed her perfume? Even in my own head, it sounded flimsy. Weak. But the feeling grew heavier by the day. It got to the point where silence between us felt louder than words. Where her laughter in another room made me wonder who was making her laugh. Where her texts, her calls, her routines, all the ordinary pieces of her day, felt like possible evidence. And still, I hadn't confronted her. I wasn't ready. I wanted to believe I was wrong. That this was just anxiety, or overthinking, or boredom twisting my perception. I wanted to believe the woman I married was still there, underneath all of it. But something told me she wasn't. Not fully. And deep down, I think I knew that the truth wasn't going to be revealed in some dramatic way. It was already here, in plain sight. I just hadn't had the courage to say it out loud yet. Not then. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I had just wrapped up a client meeting early in Chicago and managed to catch an earlier flight home. I didn't text Kristen. I figured I'd surprise her. I had this small, naive idea that maybe we could have dinner together. Maybe things would feel normal again. The cab dropped me off a little after 6 p.m. The sun was just starting to set, casting a soft orange glow across the front yard. Everything looked just as I'd left it. The porch light was on, the recycling bin still by the curb. But as I reached the front door, I noticed something small, barely visible unless you were looking for it. A second pair of shoes. Men's shoes. Sitting just inside the entryway. For a second, my brain didn't register it. I stared at them, trying to reason it away. Maybe her brother had stopped by? Maybe someone from work? But that didn't make sense. Not at this hour. Not without a heads up. Not with the house so still. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside. There were 2 glasses on the coffee table, half drunk, the wine still red and full-bodied. A throw blanket was bunched up on the couch, like someone had been sitting there not long ago. Kristen's heels were near the armchair, kicked off carelessly. Her phone buzzed once on the kitchen counter, but she didn't come running to check it like she usually did. The silence was unnatural, and then I heard it. A laugh. Her laugh. From upstairs. It wasn't loud, but it was real, the kind of laugh that comes when someone says something that truly lands. Followed by muffled voices, then footsteps, then silence. I walked up the stairs 1 step at a time, each creak of the wood sounding like thunder in my ears. I didn't know what I was expecting. I don't think I even let myself picture it. I just moved, numb and slow, like I was floating outside my own body. The bedroom door was ajar. Light spilled into the hallway. And there he was, Ryan, buttoning his shirt, standing by the window like he'd been checking to see if the coast was clear. Kristen was beside the bed, pulling her hair into a ponytail. Her face flushed, lips slightly parted. She froze when she saw me. No one said anything. For a full 5 seconds, we all just stood there. Me in the doorway, Ryan holding his shirt. Kristen caught mid-step like someone had hit pause on the scene. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear. Ryan spoke first. "Hey, man. I didn't know you were." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity of that line broke something in me. "You didn't know I was what? The husband?" Kristen took a step forward. "It's not what," she started, but stopped herself. There was nothing she could say. The lie died before it even left her lips. I looked around the room, at the wrinkled sheets, the open bottle of wine on her dresser, the soft music still playing on her phone. It was all so casual, so lived in, like they hadn't even bothered to pretend this wasn't our home. My home. I looked at her again, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Not just because of what she had done, but because of the way she looked at me, more annoyed than ashamed, like I had ruined something, like I was the one who needed to apologize for showing up. "I came home early," I said quietly. "Thought maybe we'd have dinner." No one answered. I turned around and walked back down the stairs. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just walked. My chest felt hollow. My legs moved automatically. I opened the front door, stepped outside, and let it close behind me. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a string of odd behaviors or a late-night call I couldn't verify. It was real. And it had happened right there, in our bed, under the roof we built together. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to feel anything other than the white-hot numbness in my chest. The kind of numbness that doesn't protect you. It just dulls everything until you start to question if you're even awake. I don't remember starting the engine. I don't remember driving. I just remember parking somewhere unfamiliar, some dark corner lot behind a strip mall, and sitting there until the dashboard clock blinked past midnight. I kept seeing it, Kristen's face when she saw me. Not fear, not even guilt, just inconvenience, as if I'd walked into a meeting she wasn't ready to end. And Ryan standing there like he belonged, like I was interrupting something normal. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to cry, but nothing came, only silence. Only the dull realization that whatever I thought my marriage was, it was already over. The next morning, I woke up on the couch in my office. I must have driven there in a daze. My neck hurt from the way I'd slept, and my mouth tasted like metal. I checked my phone, no messages from her. No missed calls. Just a single unread email from some newsletter I didn't remember signing up for. I stared at the screen, trying to decide if I should go home, if I could even look at her. Eventually, I did. I needed clothes, a toothbrush, my life, still tucked away in drawers I used to share with her. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. Kristen was in the kitchen, pouring herself coffee. She looked tired, but not devastated. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between rehearsed calm and fragile denial. "Hey," she said, like it was just another day, like she hadn't detonated the world I lived in 12 hours earlier. I didn't answer. I walked past her, grabbed a duffel bag, and started packing. "Can we talk?" she asked, following me to the bedroom. I stopped folding clothes. "About what?" She exhaled slowly. "It's not as simple as it looked." I let out a short laugh. "Oh." It looked pretty damn simple from where I was standing. She didn't reply right away, just stood there, wringing her hands like a child caught lying. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she finally said. "Sure. Just slipped and fell into bed with him?" She winced at that but didn't deny it. I zipped up the bag. "I'm not doing this right now. I just need space." "Where are you going?" "Anywhere else." I left without saying another word. And as I backed out of the driveway, watching her silhouette fade in the rearview mirror, I realized the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the confirmation. The finality of knowing that everything I had feared, everything I had tried so hard to explain away, was true. The worst part of all was that it wasn't a stranger who'd hurt me. It was her. The morning after I walked out, I expected to feel rage, or grief, or anything, really, but all I felt was empty, like my mind had powered down, like someone had shut off the volume on my emotions and left me staring at a life I no longer recognized. I stayed at a cheap hotel just off the highway, one of those places where everything smells faintly like bleach and cigarette smoke. The bed was stiff, the walls were thin, and the vending machine ate 2 of my dollars. But I didn't care. It was quiet. It wasn't home, but at least it wasn't hers. Kristen texted me twice that day. The first just said, "Can we please talk?" The second came hours later. "I messed up, but we can fix this. Please don't shut me out." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Not because I believed them, but because it amazed me how quickly she jumped into damage control mode. As if an apology could glue the shattered pieces of trust back together. As if I hadn't walked in on the very thing she'd spent months pretending wasn't real. The next evening, I agreed to meet her. Not because I wanted closure, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to hear what excuse she thought would make it okay. We met at a cafe near our house. Neutral ground. She wore that same sad expression she puts on when she wants to look fragile. Hair tied back. No makeup. Oversized sweater. Like she'd walked out of a movie about a woman learning life lessons the hard way. She sat down across from me, wrapped her hands around a coffee cup she barely touched, and started talking. Not apologizing, talking. Justifying. Rewriting the story. "I don't know when it started feeling off between us," she said, not meeting my eyes. "It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. You were always busy, focused on your work. I felt like I was disappearing. I said nothing. I wanted to see where she was going. I'm not blaming you, she added quickly. I'm just saying. I felt alone. Ryan was just someone who noticed, someone who listened. There it was, the narrative shift. I knew it was coming. I'd seen it before. In books, in movies, in stories people tell themselves so they don't have to sit in the full weight of their guilt. I made a mistake, she said. But you weren't exactly there for me either. It's not like everything was perfect before this. I let out a breath. So, this was my fault. No, she said, leaning in. I'm just saying things got cold between us. We stopped connecting. I didn't feel seen. And sleeping with Ryan made you feel seen? I asked flatly. She looked down. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about him. It was about what I was missing. What you were missing, I repeated, more to myself than to her. She kept talking, about how lonely she'd felt, how our routine had turned into monotony, how she hadn't meant for it to happen, how it just evolved, like the affair was some accidental chemistry experiment. Not a choice, not a string of conscious decisions, but a force of nature she couldn't resist. The more she talked, the more I realized this conversation wasn't about remorse. It was about narrative control, about reshaping the betrayal into something understandable, something mutual. If we both contributed to the problem, then maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry all the blame. That was her angle. And I think what bothered me most was how convincing she sounded. Not to me, but to herself. She believed it, or at least needed to. I asked her why she didn't just leave. If she was that unhappy. If I was that distant. She looked startled. I didn't want to throw away everything we'd built. So instead, you just broke it from the inside? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they felt rehearsed. I wasn't trying to be cold, but I couldn't find sympathy anymore. Something in me had hardened, calcified around the moment I saw Ryan standing in our bedroom. I could barely picture her without picturing that too. She said she wanted to fix things, go to counseling, start fresh. We can get through this, she said. People survive worse. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be one of those people. Because it wasn't just the cheating. It was everything around it. The gaslighting, the rewriting, the way she made me feel like I was crazy for noticing the truth. The way she shifted the blame to our routines, to my schedule, to things we both could have worked on, if she had told me. But she didn't. She waited until she had someone new before admitting she'd checked out of our marriage. That's not how love ends. That's how cowards escape. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't even raise my voice. I just sat there, listening to a woman explain how my shortcomings had created her justification. How her loneliness had somehow turned betrayal into survival. At some point, I interrupted her. Do you think I don't get lonely? She blinked. What? Do you think I don't feel disconnected sometimes? That I haven't noticed the silence between us? But I didn't look for a distraction. I looked for ways to reach you. Her face fell. I know, she whispered. That's the difference, I said. You looked for someone to blame. I looked for a way to fix it. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I thought maybe you'd understand. I looked at her for a long moment. I do understand, I said. I understand that you made a choice, and now you want me to help you feel better about it. I stood up. The coffee between us was still full. The whole conversation had left it untouched. That felt fitting. Before I left, she asked, Are you saying you're done? I don't know yet, I admitted. But for the first time in a long time, I know I need to start thinking about what's right for me, not what makes you feel less guilty. And then I walked out, back into the cool evening air, back into a life that, for the first time in years, felt completely mine again, even if it was shattered, even if I had no idea how to rebuild it. Because the truth was simple. She had already made peace with rewriting our story. Now it was time for me to write my own. It took me 3 days to stop waiting for her to admit everything. 3 days of waking up in a hotel bed that wasn't mine, checking my phone out of habit and finding no new messages. 3 days of rereading the last things she'd sent me. Those short, desperate texts that used to feel like lifelines but now felt like distractions. And in those 3 days, I realized something quietly painful. The version of Kristen I was grieving didn't exist anymore, maybe hadn't for a while. On the 4th day, I remembered the tablet. It was hers technically, but we shared it for years, mostly for movies on flights, some browsing, vacation photos. She hadn't used it in a while, or so I thought, until I found it in the bottom drawer of our nightstand while grabbing some old receipts I needed for work. Out of curiosity more than anything else, I powered it on. No passcode. Her messaging app was still logged in. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Part of me expected nothing, some casual texts, maybe a few forgotten pictures. But I found something else. A message thread with Ryan. Buried in old timestamps. A stream of chats that went back further than I expected. At first, it was surface-level office gossip, memes, inside jokes. But then, sometime around 2 months before that party, it shifted. The jokes turned personal. Late night. Flirty. It wasn't an affair that just happened. It had been fed, nurtured, protected. And then came a message from Kristen that stopped me cold. You make me feel like I exist again. And his reply, not 5 minutes later. You've always existed. You just stopped being seen. I see you. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. I felt sick. Not because they were still talking, but because it had all started long before I let myself suspect it. Before the party. Before the wine glasses. Before the perfume. I had been erased from the picture long before I knew I was even fading. And that's when I did something I wasn't proud of. I typed a message to Ryan. From her account. Just a simple line. Do you ever regret it? A pause. Then the 3 blinking dots. And finally his reply. No. 1 word. Brutal in its simplicity. Another message followed. I think we both knew what we were doing. Kristen made the first move. I didn't plan it, but I didn't stop it either. We crossed a line a long time ago. And once we did, there was no going back. There it was. The confirmation. No more vague half-truths. No more timelines she could bend. No more it just happened or we didn't mean to. He had given it to me straight. Whether out of arrogance, guilt, or just plain honesty, I'll never know. But it was what I needed. I stared at that message for a long time. It felt surreal. Like reading a story about someone else's life. Someone else's wife. Someone else's betrayal. But it was mine. And what hit hardest wasn't just the words. It was the confidence in them. The unapologetic tone. Like what happened was inevitable. Like something they both walked into eyes wide open. They weren't confused. They weren't swept away in some whirlwind. They knew exactly what they were doing. And she started it. I put the tablet down like it was something dirty. Something I didn't want in my hands anymore. I washed them even though they weren't physically unclean. I stood in that hotel bathroom staring at my own reflection for a long time. I didn't recognize myself either. And then, like clockwork, my mind went backward. To all the moments I now understood in a different light. The missed calls. The late nights. The moments she pulled away when I touched her shoulder in the kitchen. The distant smiles when I tried to joke with her. The way she used to reach for me under the covers, and how that stopped happening months ago. The 1,000 tiny signs I dismissed because I believed we were stronger than suspicion. And all this time she'd been turning towards someone else. I remembered one Sunday morning in particular. It was early spring. We were making pancakes in the kitchen. She was playing music on her phone, dancing barefoot on the tile while flipping batter. I came up behind her, wrapped my arms around her waist. She leaned into me, rested her head on my shoulder. At the time, it felt like we were okay. Now I realized that was around the same time those messages began. How long had I been clinging to a version of us that only existed in my mind? And worse, how much of her warmth had been recycled from somewhere else? I picked up the tablet again. Typed one more message. Why her? He responded quickly this time. She was easy to talk to. She didn't pretend. I felt seen too. That word again. Seen. Kept showing up like some poetic excuse. Like being seen was worth everything else they shattered. And yet, it wasn't even personal. I don't think he loved her. I don't think she loved him. I think they loved the reflection they saw in each other: newness, attention, ego. They loved the version of themselves they got to be when no one was looking. And I was collateral damage. Eventually, I deleted the messages. I didn't want to keep rereading them, but I saved **TS. Not for revenge. Not for leverage. Just to keep myself from ever forgetting what I'd seen. The truth laid bare. The evidence that it wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time slip. It was deliberate, continuous, chosen. Afterward, I went for a walk. It was cold out, gray and still, the kind of weather that turns your breath into fog and makes your skin feel too thin. I wandered without a destination, letting the wind bite at my face, trying to ground myself in anything other than the storm in my chest. I passed a couple walking their dog, laughing, arms brushing. I looked away. I didn't want to feel jealous. I didn't want to compare. But I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it is to assume love protects you from being hurt like this. How easy it is to believe that being married means you're immune to this kind of betrayal. You're not. Love doesn't protect you from being chosen last. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the mini fridge, the muffled voices in the hallway, the occasional slam of a door. Every sound felt louder than it should. In the stillness, I tried to remember what it felt like to trust her. Really trust her. And I realized I couldn't. Not anymore. That part of me had been severed. And the man who replied to me through her tablet had finished the job she started. A few days later, I found an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside were printed **TS of their messages. Some I hadn't seen, and a photo of them kissing outside a bar. The date matched the night she told me she was meeting friends. No more gray areas. Someone, maybe a friend of his or hers, wanted me to see it all. Wanted me to stop doubting. The truth wasn't just confirmed, it was documented. I packed my things and moved into a small rental near the river. At first, the silence was unbearable. I lived like a ghost. But slowly, I began to rebuild: therapy, sketching again, long walks alone. One morning, I got a photo of a dog shelter with a note. "Here you'll find loyalty." I went.